On July 18, 1972, inside the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis, over 12,000 fans roared as Elvis launched into Love Me Tender, but halfway through the verse, he stopped cold. All eyes turned to a frail orphan girl in the front row, and what happened next left the audience dead silent before erupting in a reaction that would become legendary. The Mid-South Coliseum was a living entity that night. Lights swung in rhythmic sweeps, catching the glitter of Elvis's jumpsuit, reflecting back onto a sea of waving scarves and bobbing heads. Cameras flashed in staccato bursts. Some fans held their breath, anticipating the first note of Love Me Tender. The air was thick with the scent of popcorn mingling with cigarette smoke, the subtle tense of anticipation pressing against the walls. Ushers shifted nervously, trying to keep aisles clear, their uniforms brushing past restless teenagers, whose eyes shone with expectation. Elvis stepped forward, microphone in hand, a grin barely hiding his intensity. The opening chords floated, soft and trembling, then built into the warm timbre of his voice, carrying across the arena. From the back rows to the front, fans leaned forward instinctively, bodies pressed against the bleachers, hearts lifted in rhythm with the king's guitar. Yet in the midst of this euphoria, one pair of eyes stood out. A small girl named Clara, no older than 9, sat perched on a folding chair near the front row. Her frame was fragile, her clothes plain, and a tattered program clutched in her trembling hands. The light caught the strands of hair falling across her eyes as she stared at the stage, an almost imperceptible tremor running through her small body. She was dwarfed by the excitement surrounding her, yet somehow her presence felt like a quiet anchor amid the roiling sea of fans. A gasp escaped from a nearby mother, and heads turned briefly, curious about the child who seemed so absorbed, so utterly absorbed in the performance. The crowd's energy swirled around her like a storm, yet she remained motionless, captivated. Some teens nudged each other, whispering, "Do you see her? She's right there," yet no one anticipated how pivotal her presence would become that night. As Elvis bent slightly toward the microphone, warming the next note, a subtle shift rippled through the crowd. The music carried, yet the eyes of every fan seemed drawn to the front row, to the small, trembling figure who, in that moment, was about to change the rhythm of the night. Have you ever felt invisible in a crowd, waiting for one person to notice you? Can a single pair of eyes truly change the energy of a room? But one pair of eyes, belonging to Clara, would soon shift the night's trajectory. Camera pans across the glittering stage. Soft overhead lights, muffled cheers transitioning into anticipatory hush. Close-up of Clara gripping her program. Faint strings swell. The soft hum of the orchestra underlined Elvis's tender notes, filling the Mid-South Coliseum with warmth. But then a muffled cry cut through the music like a sudden gust of wind. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the first few rows. Clara, clutching her tattered program, trembled, tears forming at the corner of her eyes. Her small voice, fragile but unmistakable, pierced the carefully orchestrated rhythm of the King's ballad. A nearby fan leaned forward, sharp and impatient. "Quiet, girl," he hissed, the words ricocheting off the polished walls. Some patrons frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Others leaned closer, curiosity and concern mingling on their faces. The energy of 12,000 hearts shifted, subtle but palpable, like a sudden drop in the arena's collective pulse. The band faltered for a brief moment, a single note lingering too long. The rhythm's slightly unsteady dot, Elvis froze mid-verse, his eyes scanning the front row. He had sung thousands of shows, played countless arenas, yet something about this moment, about this child, caused a rare pause. The microphone squealed softly as he raised it closer to his mouth. For a heartbeat, the audience sensed the uncertainty, the fragile balance between routine and disruption, noise and the unexpected. The tension was electric. Could he continue as if nothing had happened, ignoring the interruption? Or would he acknowledge her? The crowd held its collective breath, leaning into the unspoken question. Each person suddenly aware of the fragile human story unfolding before them. The arena went dead silent. The contrast between the music and the child's voice amplified by the suspense. Elvis's gaze lingered on Clara. Her hands shook as she pressed the program closer to her chest. The lights, previously dazzling, now seemed softer, drawing attention to her small frame. The king's legendary instinct for connection, for noticing what others might miss, was on full display. A single fan muttered, "Is he going to?" But no one dared finish the sentence. All eyes were locked, anticipating the choice that could define the night. What would you do in front of thousands if one fragile voice broke your rhythm? Have you ever faced a moment where the right choice required halting everything you had rehearsed? And then, as if the universe had collectively exhaled, the arena shifted its focus. What would happen next was uncertain, yet everyone sensed the possibility that the ordinary could transform into the extraordinary. Elvis's pause was no longer hesitation. It was an invitation, a bridge to a decision that would ripple far beyond the song, beyond the walls of the Colosseum, into the very heart of those who witnessed it in that instant. Thousands wondered, would he ignore her or acknowledge her? Close-up of Clara, trembling, soft murmur of the audience. Orchestra notes slightly dragging, camera pans, audience reactions. Faint gasp, mic squeal, strings underscore tension. Lights dim slightly on front row. The tension in the Mid-South Coliseum thickened. Security personnel, brisk and alert, began moving toward Clara, intent on removing her from the front row. The collective murmur of 12,000 fans rose in apprehensions and voices, angry. Some anxious, others quietly sympathetic. A faint rustle of programs and the click of camera shutters underscored the uncertainty. As if the arena itself were holding its breath, the band, sensing the sudden disruption, played a cautious vamp. Soft chords hovering between continuation and pause. Drums tapped hesitantly, guitar strings quivering under skilled fingers, trying not to overwhelm the fragile moment at center stage. Even in rehearsal, no script had accounted for this unscripted heartbeat threatening to rewrite the rhythm of the night. Elvis, standing center stage, raised a hand. 1, 2 beats, and then a deliberate pause. The guards froze mid-step, their shadows flickering across the polished floor. The audience sensed the choice hanging in the air. Would the king allow protocol to override humanity, or would compassion dictate the course of events? The arena went dead silent, the contrast between authority and empathy palpable. Whispers flowed like currents through the crowd. "She's just a child. Leave her, he'll do something." Every eye followed the small girl, who sat huddled, clutching her tattered program as if it were armor. The lights captured the tremor in her hands, the faint shimmer of tears along her lashes. In that fragile stillness, every heartbeat in the arena echoed her uncertainty. Elvis exhaled, voice low but carrying through the microphone a single note, unspoken yet heard. His eyes never left Clara, He had faced chaos before crowds, broken strings, technical mishaps, but this was different. The stakes were human. One choice, one gesture, and the arena's energy would either fracture into discomfort or unite in awe. The crowd waited, every pulse synchronized to the decision unfolding before them. Security officers shifted uneasily, unsure if defiance of their orders was permissible. Mothers gripped children's hands, teenagers stiffened, the elderly leaned forward. For a few suspended moments, the Colosseum transformed from a concert hall into a theater of morality, where empathy weighed more than schedules. And courage meant pausing the music itself. When confronted with a choice between rules and compassion, which would you follow? Can a single act of kindness hold enough power to pause the world around you? And then, in a gesture so simple yet profoundly defiant, Elvis's hand rose higher. The guards halted completely. He did not advance. He did not gesture them on. The king had chosen not authority, not procedure, not rehearsal, but humanity. The audience exhaled collectively, a release that vibrated through the rafters. Time itself seemed to slow as anticipation gave way to what could only be called the inevitable. The arena was about to witness an act of legendary compassion. The crowd held its breath, unsure whether anger or mercy would win the night. Security shadows moving, audience murmurs and gasps, soft, vamping guitar. Drum taps hesitant, close-up of Clara, lights dim slightly to focus on front row. Faint strings swelling to underscore emotional tension. Elvis stepped forward, closer to the edge of the stage, every movement deliberate. The microphone squealed faintly as he lowered it toward his mouth, the ballad momentarily suspended in mid-air. Clara's small frame seemed to shrink under the bright spotlights, her wide eyes locked on the figure before her. The orchestra waited, the soft hum of the arena filling the space between silence and sound. He crouched slightly, silk scarf in hand, and his voice softened. "What's your name, honey?" The words were gentle, intimate, carrying across the thousands in the Colosseum, yet addressed to a single child. Clara's whisper was barely audible, yet her name traveled on the collective breath of the crowd. Elvis smiled, nodding, and extended the scarf toward her. "It's yours now," he said, short and deliberate. The arena gasped. Thousands of hearts skipped together, the sudden act cutting through the usual cadence of performance. Short bursts of applause swelled and died down, replaced by the electric hush of anticipation. The king's decision was unconventional, rehearsed, unscripted, but in that moment it felt inevitable. Compassion had overtaken procedure. Humanity had eclipsed performance. He spoke again, each word a measured cadence. "She matters. Tonight she matters." The simplicity of the phrase carried monumental weight. The words, short and clear, echoed through the arena, bouncing off walls and rafters, settling into every corner of the crowded hall. Fans leaned forward, collectively aware that they were witnessing not just a song, but a moral turning point, an unspoken lesson in empathy played out before 12,000 witnesses. Have you ever witnessed someone take a stand quietly, yet profoundly? What small gesture might change someone's world forever? Clara's trembling hands accepted the scarf, pressing it to her chest. The orchestra resumed, now guided not by notes alone, but by the emotional pulse of the moment. Elvis's eyes swept across the audience, scanning reactions. Tears glistened on cheeks, mouths hung open in awe, and whispers of admiration flowed like currents through the arena. The crowd had shifted, transformed, united in recognition of what had just occurred. The contrast was stark. Moments ago, the arena buzzed with routine expectation. Now it resonated with compassion. Security officers relaxed, understanding that the king had redirected the narrative of the evening with a single human act. The fragile tension that had gripped the crowd released in ripples. The quiet moments amplified by soft strings swelling under the rising ovation. And then, as if the collective awe had reached a tipping point, a spontaneous cheer erupted. The arena was no longer just a concert hall. It was a shared testament to humanity, the music now a vessel carrying both melody and moral weight. The ballad continued, but its meaning had deepened beyond the notes. Silence. Then an eruption close-up of Clara, accepting the scarf. Mics squeal, audience gasps, faint strings swelling. Camera pans of awestruck fans, orchestra resumes with tender emphasis. Slow zoom on Elvis's expression, ovation rising. The Colosseum, once a stage for routine spectacle, now thrummed with collective purpose. Clara clutched the silk scarf against her chest, wide-eyed, as the audience leaned in closer, their energy merging into a singular current. Women pressed forward with flowers, little bundles of daisies and carnations, passing them carefully down to her small hands. A man, perhaps in his 50s, gently pressed a ticket stub into her palm. The paper creased from decades of anticipation, yet now carrying a weight far greater than its original value. Elvis restarted "Love Me Tender," but the performance had transformed. Each note seemed to cradle Clara, each pause accentuating her presence. The king's gaze held hers, connecting stage and audience in a quiet intimacy amplified by 12,000 voices. Fans began chanting her name, Clara, Clara. The cadence rose and fell, a spontaneous hymn of recognition and inclusion. The arena, once tense with uncertainty, had united in compassion, singing not merely for entertainment, but in celebration of a child who had become the night's heart. The crowd's energy shifted the very rhythm of the music. Teenagers who had been restless moments ago now swayed with reverence. Elderly couples leaned forward, nodding softly, tears glistening in the corners of their eyes. Even security officers, who had earlier approached with purpose and caution, paused to witness the communal embrace of empathy. The room, once defined by sound and spectacle, now resonated with shared humanity. Elvis's voice carried a new warmth, each line directed subtly toward Clara, weaving her presence into the very fabric of the performance. Every chord of the guitar, every tender swell of the orchestra, became a bridge between the king, the child, and the audience. For the first time that night, the song was not just sung, it was lived. Reflective questions. Have you ever seen a crowd transform in unison, guided by a single act of kindness? How does witnessing someone else's moment of courage change your own perspective? As the final chorus approached, the chant of Clara's name rose above the music, a crescendo of love and acknowledgement. The king smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the choice to pause, to honor, to embrace had rippled far beyond the simple melody. In that instant, every individual in the Colosseum felt part of something larger, a shared recognition that small acts of compassion could unite even the largest of crowds. The lights shimmered over the audience, capturing the moment in glittering snapshots, while the soft strings of the orchestra underscored the emotional arc. Cameras clicked, preserving fragments of a night that would be whispered about for decades. Clara, still clutching her scarf, now smiled timidly, her fear and uncertainty replaced by wonder and belonging. What began as a disruption had transformed into unity. Close-ups of flowers passing forward, ticket stub in Clara's hand. Audience chanting her name, strings swelling. Camera pans capturing tears and smiles, soft spotlights following Clara. Ovation rising gradually. The following morning, Memphis buzzed with talk of the previous night. Local newspapers splashed headlines across their front pages. Elvis stops show for child. A moment of humanity in the Coliseum. Photographs captured Clara clutching the silk scarf, her wide eyes glimmering under the stage lights. Fans who had attended spoke in hushed reverence, replaying every second. The memory etched into their collective consciousness. A bootleg tape, whispered about among dedicated fans, began circulating quietly, capturing the pause, the gesture, the eruption of applause. Even decades later, collectors would speak of it as a holy artifact, the moment immortalized not by chart success, but by empathy in action. The tale of that night traveled far beyond Memphis, a reminder that the king's legacy was not merely his music, but the lives he touched with the same tenderness that colored his ballads years later. Clara, now grown, would visit the small orphanage where she had spent much of her childhood. Outside, a modest plaque had been installed, bronze and weathered but enduring, etched simply with the words, "She mattered." Tonight she mattered. Visitors would stop, pause, and reflect, tracing their fingers across the letters, connecting to a moment that had once transcended the ordinary. The king's words had survived the decades, echoing beyond the Colosseum, beyond the microphones, beyond the song itself. Side characters, like the usher who had nervously guided fans through the aisles, recalled the hush that had overtaken the room, the realization that something profound had taken place. Security officers would reminisce about the unusual suspension of protocol, the pause that had humanized the role of authority. The small gestures of audience members, the flowers, the ticket stub. Whispered encouragements became symbolic threads in a tapestry of collective compassion. Even the stage props, the glimmering white jumpsuit, the silk scarf, became artifacts of memory. Photographs preserved on walls, clippings folded into scrapbooks, and whispered stories at conventions kept the night alive. Musicians who had been present spoke of the hum of the strings and the tentative drum beats that followed the pause, marveling at how sound itself could bend to the weight of empathy. How often do moments of compassion ripple beyond the initial act, touching more lives than we could imagine? Have you ever carried a memory of someone else's kindness that changed your perception forever? The narrative of the Colosseum that night grew into legend, not merely a concert, but a testament to the power of presence, to the weight of noticing, and to the courage of pausing when all eyes are upon you. Each detail, the scarf, the whispered name, the unified chant, code a truth that would remain timeless. Legacy is measured not only in fame or applause, but in the lives forever altered by brief yet deliberate acts of humanity. The moment turned legend, shaping how fans remembered his compassion as much as his music. Archival newspaper clippings, bootleg tape, image, close-up of bronze plaque, slow pan across audience photos, soft strings underscore reflective narration, ambient city noises of Memphis, faint echo of Love Me Tender carrying over. One concert, one child, one choice to pause a song and acknowledge a single life in the sea of thousands. The Mid-South Coliseum that night became more than a venue. It became a stage for humanity itself. Crowds remember the high notes, the soaring vocals, the glittering jumpsuits, but history clings to the pauses, the moments when music gives way to empathy. Elvis's gesture was simple yet profound. In crouching to meet Clara, offering a scarf, speaking her name into the microphone, he revealed the quiet power of noticing. It was a reminder that legacy is not built solely on fame or talent, but on the lives we choose to honor when the world is watching. The thousands who witnessed it left the arena carrying the memory forward. A collective heartbeat now, forever intertwined with that small, transformative act. The scarves, flowers, bootleg recordings, and press clippings became tangible echoes of the night. Yet the true resonance was intangible, the awareness that compassion, even in the smallest gesture, could unite, elevate, and redefine a crowd. For Clara, for Elvis, for every witness, the lesson lingered. Attention and kindness can transform ordinary moments into legend. When the world is watching, who will you stop for? How might a single act of empathy ripple far beyond the moment it occurs? So ask yourself, when the world is watching, who will you stop for? Slow fade of empty Colosseum, soft strings underscore reflective narration. Archival footage of scarves and flowers, camera pans of newspaper headlines. Echo of faint audience murmurs fading into silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes small acts of kindness can echo through generations. Were you or someone you know at that Memphis show? Comment your memory below, because legacies like this live on through the stories we tell, one act of compassion at a time.